had a lot of affirmation and a lot of reward and things that kept me lost in myself. You know, that this rich life experience was just there for me for the taking, and I reveled in it. It was an adrenaline fix. It was this opportunity to just, oh my God, I can do that, and today I can do this, and yeah, and I'm on top of a mountain, and I'm, you know, flying in private jets with so and so, or whatever it is, kind of kept me in this world that that made me feel that, you know, I was on my own train.
Timothy, welcome back to From Vision to Creation. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me again.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really excited because last time we talked about your career, how you discovered your passion, and kind of what led you to have the career that you've had, the iconic, amazing career you've had, I should say. Today, I want to go a little bit more in depth about some of your idols, your early influences as a child. And then I also want to ask you some questions about some of your shoots, and maybe you can share some stories with us.
Okay, great.
So you've mentioned that two of your idols in photography are Richard Avedon and Irving Penn. What I think is really interesting about the two of them is that Richard Avedon, he's famous for introducing movement into his photography, and he captures it beautifully. And Irving Penn is known to have shoots that are very controlled. Like, he doesn't like movement; everything has to be just perfect. And Richard Avedon doesn't, you know, necessarily operate under those. He doesn't need to have a perfect set. What do you think the value is in both of those styles, and how have you used both in your work?
It's really interesting that they both were somewhat competing in their careers at the same time to do the same editorial work for the same magazines, for the same fashion campaigns, and were, in fact, each had a contract at like Harper's Bazaar and Vogue, the two main fashion magazines. And they would switch back and forth. Like, one had a contract with Vogue and the other one was at at Harper's Bazaar, and then they would flip at different times. Yeah, I mean, I think the influence of Richard Avedon for me was, well, they both were about control, because I think photography is somewhat about control. You kind of need to control your craft. You need to somehow control the set and the interaction between you and your subject and what goes on. Although part of that control could be, you know, letting things just happen, which I think, you know, is part of the medium. But Avedon was more about the simplicity of the light. You know, in his thing, there's only one sun, there's only one light source, and everything else is reflected off it. And so, from a technical standpoint, that was his simplicity of light. I mean, I'm going to vacillate a little bit here, just to be clear, because as I'm thinking about it, because you've made me think about their work. I mean, they both were about simple light. It wasn't complex, and I think that's something to really think about relative to photography. But yes, Avedon was about movement and about energy and about letting things happen, and that was his control within that crazy box and within that crazy environment. Things happened, magic happened, and I can really relate to that. I think Irving Penn was a little bit more. That box was a different kind of control, and he had a very advanced version of what he saw, what he wanted from it. And I think Avedon was more open to what can happen. And I think that what I learned was a real control of my craft, so that I knew what I could get and what I kind of wanted the frame, the composition, the light to look like, but I still was open to the magic that can happen by allowing energy and other things to happen. So in one way, I was really control of a set and of a composition, but I was then interacting with subject to allow for that magic to happen. That's something that we don't know. is going to happen until you let it rip, you know?
How do you strike a good balance between controlling the things in your environment and also allowing spontaneity?
Well, again, I think, look, there are borders. It's a frame. You know, this isn't, we're not talking about real life. We're talking about everything's within four borders, you know? And so consequently, I can control what's in those four borders. I can control the light. I can control the composition. And I can, within that composition, be aware of what can take place that maybe I don't know is going to take place yet.
And one thing I heard Avedon say in an interview that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to ask you about is he's talking about how once he had to photograph the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, and he had been observing them in a casino for a while and for a few days in Nice. And he said that when he sat down with them to actually take the portrait, none of what he observed in the casino came through in the photographs he was taking. And so what he was trying to do was capture their loss of humanity. And then he decided that he needed to play a trick on them in a sense. And he says that, you know, sometimes you need to trick your sitter, but never for the sake of the trick, to capture what it is that you're trying to capture. And he said that they were with their pugs in this hotel room that he was photographing them in. And he said that he said he looked at them in the eyes and he said, look, if I seem a little off, or if I look a little strange to you, it's because I just, on my cab ride over here, my cab driver ran over a dog. And so instantly their faces fell, and he captured these amazing shots that he wanted. So
well, again, I think that comes back to the difference between the two men. You know, Penn knew exactly what he wanted to get from his subjects, or at least seemingly, because by looking through most of his work. Where Avedon was definitely looking for reaction. And again, we come back to Avedon's set was controlled, but within that control, within those four walls, if you will, the frame, he was willing to let stuff happen. And he had a vision for how to make them interesting, but he wasn't seeing it until he felt he needed to do something to kind of light it up. And I can relate to that.
That was going to be my next question, actually. Have you ever had to trick your sitter to get the shot?
I don't know if trick is it, but it's being present. It's having a really wide field of view, kind of peripherally, knowing what's going on at all times, both everything your subject is feeling, but also sort of what's going on around them. And so sometimes you need to throw something over here. It's sort of, we mentioned something earlier. It's almost like a magician in sleight of hand. You know, you're doing one thing over here, but you're really doing this over here. So you're distracting somebody this way to get that. It's similar in a way sometimes. You know, sometimes you get a subject and they're so interesting or they're so engaged in the process or in somehow they're really easy to connect with you, and so it's easy to just go to work and let it happen, let the camera kind of capture it. And there's other times where you need to sort of light it up a little bit.
And Avedon once famously said that he aims to photograph things that he's afraid of. Have you ever photographed something you're afraid of?
Something I'm going to back up just a second. Avedon was like, not full of himself, but he was full of himself, you know, and he kind of loved being Avedon. And part of that was the way he lived, the way he acted out, the things he said, things like that, where Irving Penn was so reserved and did not want to be a celebrity. Avedon wanted to be a celebrity. And so, you know, the really different personalities there. I don't know about afraid of, but I walk into the situations, with this wonderful sense of not knowing. And I like that feeling. So I like walking in and not knowing what I'm doing. And there's a little something about an edge to that keeps me sharp. I think it's a little bit of an adrenaline rush. I think there's a little bit of a excitement about the possibilities and being more reactionary than too thought out and planned. I think I've said this even in our last interview. You know, in my world, if I planned too much, I would be disappointed, or it wouldn't come out the way I wanted anyway. So I'm more open to letting things happen a bit. And again, that comes with controlling what you can control, controlling that box, that frame. And within that box, I know exactly what it's going to look like. Now let's let some real magic happen.
The last time we spoke, you talked to me about how when you're arriving at a project, you and your subject, neither of you really know what you're going to get. And that's kind of my case too. When I come to do interviews with different people, I'm not quite sure exactly how it's going to happen. So that nervousness that you're talking about, maybe I can't say I know exactly what you're talking about, but I do experience it to a certain degree. At what point does the nervousness go away?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it nervousness because I'm not nervous. And I'm not intimidated by my subject, but I am excited by it. And so there's butterflies. There's an unknown factor that I got off on. I think I come into situations intentionally being open and not knowing what's what. And yeah, I think the subject does too. And I think that's a fair exchange that we both don't know. But again, we could keep coming back to the word control. I also am confident in what I'm doing enough to pivot where necessary and to be reactionary to someone's moods, to something that happens. We could be sitting there with their pug next to them and the dog farts, and that changes everything. And then all of a sudden they laugh in something that was a different kind of moment, So you kind of have to be open, and that image could be the image. There's a picture I took that we've referenced before, and it's a picture of Liza Minnelli that I did with a couple of biker friends of mine. And, she got in front of the camera. They were all tattooed, and she got in front of the camera and lifted up her blouse, and there was this little tattoo, and we didn't know that, And although I shot all day long and shot a lot of other really great images, that one stood out, and it had to do with that spontaneity and that unknown thing that can come from just being open.
And you photographed some of the same icons that both Irving Penn and Richard Avedon have, like Elizabeth Taylor, Paul McCartney, Audrey Hepburn, Al Pacino. How did it feel to work with these, first of all, iconic subjects, but who also had worked with people that you looked up to in photography?
Insecure about my own version, because they were masters, and that's the way I saw them. And so yeah, it was like, well, I can't possibly create an Avedon or a Penn of either of those people, but I guess in some way, I made it my own. But I think that's the thing that really got me off on my career in the beginning, was all of a sudden I was able to work with these legends and people that I was enamored by, and whose work I respected. And, Audrey Hepburn, Robert Mitchum, some of those early people that I photographed, it was the end of their careers and their lives, but I still managed to capture some of that. As a young photographer, that was a big deal. That made me feel like all of a sudden I was, creating a piece of history that carried through, my whole career.
You got to work with Robert Mitchum early on in your career. He was one of your idols. And actually, I watched Out of the Past because I listened to our last conversation.
Amazing.
It was such an incredible film.
Great, yeah.
What was that like, Timothy, getting to work with somebody who you grew up watching? And then I also feel like the portrait that you took of him that's on your website is very noir inspired. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Yeah. And I again, I don't want to repeat myself, and I think we might have mentioned this in our last discussion, which was a pivotal photo shoot for me. That portrait of him really was a big moment in my career because, number one, because I was working with someone who I was very enamored with, and whose work I really, really respected. And of course, his history and his, who he was in Hollywood and all of the things that make up his personality. But it was also the photograph itself transcended just taking a picture. It transcended a snapshot. It became something that collaboratively recreated that became a different kind of image, And I've said before that, I learned that I could, from that photo shoot, that I could make an image rather than take an image. And that's really what I was looking for in my career. So it was like an aha moment. It was like, oh, this is the kind of control I can have and make something really special that is not just a picture that anyone else can do. And so that was really an aha moment for me. And I always, to this day, try and create the kind of imagery that sort of transcends a snapshot or something that anyone can do.
Are there any memorable moments from your shoot with Robert Mitchum?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. It's really interesting too, and I'll say this before I kind of tell you the anecdote, which was that you can easily sometimes be disappointed when you meet your idols, and that wasn't the case. And frankly, maybe it's just who I am or whatever, but I've never ever been disappointed by any of the people that I've met. I've always been sort of even more respectful of who they were or are, and and still really appreciate them both as people and as the talents that they are. I was told to meet him by a publicist at this hotel in Santa Barbara, and which is where he lived. And I couldn't find him, and I walked into the bar, and he was in the bar. And he must have been in his 70s at the time. And he was in the bar, and he had like a couple empty martini glasses in front of him, and he was getting lit, before the shoot. But he was cool, and he was respectful for this kid. I had long hair and scruffy, and I was clearly a young photographer, but he was respectful, given his gruff sort of self. And then I took him out into the parking lot. Actually, his son showed up at the shoot, and I took him out in the parking lot, and I was setting up like one picture from the other, changing the light a little bit. And I was sitting talking to his son, and I'm watching his publicist who was there and him, and they were talking to, I think maybe I've been the writer from the article or something, was there, the journalist. And he was out of frame. The publicist was in front of him, and they were talking to this other person, and he was like grabbing her from behind, and nobody could see it except my assistant and I, because we were behind him, and we saw that he was like goosing her, and she was like kind of brushing him off, but the person they were talking to didn't know it and didn't see it. So he was exactly what I wanted him to be. He was irreverent. He was, this is the guy who got arrested for marijuana in 1949, So it was all, it meant a lot to me. And then, of course, to have that moment that I actually got to shoot a picture of my idol, that sort of changed my career.
Well, so it's nice to hear that you met your idol and that you enjoyed meeting your idol, because I did not have a similar experience.
With him or with someone else?
Oh, no, not with him, with somebody else. And I won't say names, but somebody who's very well known in the podcasting space. And I was really looking forward to meeting her. And I walked up to her and I said, I have so much respect for you. I really love the content that you make. It's nice to meet you. And then I said, would you mind if I had 10 seconds of your time? Because I wanted to ask her about her perspective on something.
She tell you to fuck off?
She told me to fuck off. She looked me up and down and she said, I actually don't have 10 seconds.
Oh.
I was like, woo, yeah.
Okay.
So that's awkward. But that's cool. I like that.
Did you have a snappy retort back to her, or were you dumbfounded?
I was dumbfounded. I just kind of turned to stone for a split second, then just walked away. And then I was mad at her later, but it took me a while to process.
Yeah, it's sometimes you can be disappointed, by the, well, especially the people we're talking about, because they're put on a pedestal to some degree, and I mean, what I do is create their image, right? So it's all about an image. It's not reality. Again, I don't want to repeat things we've said before, because I know I have used this before, but I mean, Richard Avedon talked about a photograph and truth a lot, that it's not really a truth. It's not truthfully a photograph of you. It's my version of you, right? Or his version of you in that case. So, we're talking about images that aren't really who people are. It's a two-dimensional representation of who they are. And the beauty of what we do is with the tools we have and with the emotion that can come from a photographic image and all of the technique and things that we utilize to create that, we can create an image of someone that can elevate them. I mean, it could also tear them down, but it can elevate, who they are. And then sometimes you can meet them and they can't live up to the image that's been created of them. In Robert Mitchum's case, right? I was going to say, he represented this tough guy and the film Memoir and all of the other roles that he's played. But the truth is that in order for him to really be that big a star, that talented an artist, it's sort of innate. It's who he is, and I think that's something I found in all the people I've worked with, that at a certain level of artistry, it's pretty real. They're not faking it. There's something there that is really special that makes them who they are in their art.
On that project, was there something in particular that you were trying to capture from Robert Mitchum and your image?
I mean, that was one that I was nervous, because I was young. Not nervous of meeting somebody. I'm comfortable with people. I'm comfortable with how I'm gonna present myself to people. I'm not intimidated by an interaction with a stranger, but I wanted to come away with something. This was important to me. And that's why it was such a big deal that it transcended just a banal, photograph.
And one of your first major breaks was photographing Yoko Ono in 1984, which I know ultimately led to your Rolling Stone cover contract.
Yeah.
How did that one come about?
I grew up at a certain time when I had older sisters and they were of an age, they were teenagers, during sort of the British invasion and that period, mid-60s of rock and roll. And certainly the Beatles were a big part of their life growing up, and consequently being their little brother, it was going on in the house. And so I was quite aware of it as well. So I grew up with the Beatles, and even though I may not have been the age they were, and really in that moment, I was on the cusp of enough to feel it. And of course, that whole period of the renaissance of music in this country and in the world, which was rock and roll and all that came from that British invasion. But, the point is I was like really in tune with everything Beatle leading up to that. And I was very aware of John Lennon and living in New York City. In fact, I'd seen him on the street and, again, I'm a kid and enamored with this. And now I'm older and it's still like a part of my life and they're still there. And now I may have the opportunity to actually work with them. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to work with John, although I have worked with Paul and Ringo and Julian, John's son. So anyway, to be able to photograph Yoko, and it was not long after John was killed. So she was just coming out from that, her grief and coming out to the public again when I had that opportunity. So it was kind of a big deal for me. And so on one hand, it was the history of what she represent, Beatle-wise, but it was also knowing and having to have a sensitivity for, what she had gone through and sort of who she is now and what she represents now, given John's passing. And I photographed her with young Sean, her son, who I've since photographed a number of times too, as he's gotten older. But he was a little boy with her in this picture. So yeah, it was kind of a big deal for me. And I kind of scrunched my face when you said, that led to my Rolling Stone relationship. But there were like 3 shoots in there that kind of happened around the same time when I was starting to work for the magazines that I wanted to work with, Rolling Stone being one of them, that transitioned quickly. And that may have been the one, or it could have been a couple of other subjects for the magazine at that time. I don't really remember. I mean, I can tell you who they were, but...
One thing that we talked about the last time was how your perception of images that you've taken totally changes over time because your subject changes. So I want to go...
Well, I changed too. I mean,
that's true. Yeah, that's right. We change and then the subject changes. So
perspective is everything, right? So I'm a different guy. I'm an older guy looking at pictures that I did, and time, changes. But pictures I shot in the 80s, I mean, the context is completely different for everybody involved. Historical context, my context.
And I want to dive into a few of the specific shoots and just ask you what your perspective is now in retrospect, and also what it was then when you took the photos. One that I found very intriguing, and also it's very personal to me, Britney Spears, because like I shared with you a few days ago, one of the photos that you've taken, I had on my wall. Like I was obsessed with Britney Spears as a kid. And my dad would say, oh yeah, Alexander, he's in love with Britney Spears, that's going to be his girlfriend. When really I wanted to be her. I didn't want to date her. I was obsessed. I loved her. I want to ask about the time that you worked with her in Kentwood, Louisiana at the beginning of her career, what your perspective on her was then, and how, everything that's happened from then until now, how that kind of has, your perspective on that shoot has changed over the years.
I mean, at the time, she had broken. So when I got to her, she wasn't like a nobody. She was a somebody already. Mm-hmm. That video, which was what song?
Oops, I Did It Again.
Yeah. I mean, was major. And so it changed things. So there was a duality to the fact that she was a girl woman, because she really was a little girl, but that was sexy. That video was sexy. Mm-hmm. And subsequently, she became a sex symbol to some degree, but yet she was still a little girl. And in fact, when I photographed her, I went to her house with her parents and her family, her siblings there and stuff. So it was this weird thing. On one hand, I wanted to make her sexy, but on the other hand, I couldn't push that too far, nor would I want to. It was still trying to capture who she was. So I think in the shoot, I mean, it was a full day, and I do a lot in a full day, a lot of different outfits and setups and different feelings, and I think I captured both. I had this shot of her with this pickup truck that I did that was, it might have been her family's pickup truck. I don't remember. It must have been. And one of the shots, she's with a hose and she's like washing it, which is very reminiscent of sort of the sexuality from Cool Hand Luke. If you remember that movie with Paul Newman, where there's this woman, washing a car and she's getting all wet and sudsy as she's like washing the car. And so there's sort of that feeling that could have come from that particular shot. But in fact, it's more playful and she's laughing. And that shot is really kind of fun and cute and youthful. And then there's another shot where she's leaning on the truck in this very sort of sexy, womanly way, and her midriff is showing, and it's like a really different kind of picture. So, I managed to capture both sides of not only who she was as a person, but who her public persona was and was going to become.
And you also did an amazing shoot with Howard Stern, and who is a very bold personality. And I must say the photos are very bold as well. I'm thinking specifically about the one where he's standing up and there are two like really beautiful women, covering his midsection. Not
his midsection.
Oh, I know. Let me say that again. Yeah. They were covering. You know what they were covering. What was that shoot like? It was
actually the second shoot that I had done with Howard. And the first one was really actually kind of funny. And I'll tell you a little brief anecdote about that. It was for the cover of Penthouse magazine. And this was years prior. And he came to my studio and we did these pictures, and they were straightforward portraits. They were kind of fun. And then I was like, Howard, it's Penthouse. Like, if I got this idea of like doing you kind of like a centerfold, like Burt Reynolds had done many, many years prior with Cosmopolitan magazine, sort of this, or was it Playgirl, whatever it was, but it was like this really provocative, like you were the female pinup centerfold, and I got this idea that we do it with you. That is not why I was sent to do this. This is a cover portrait. It wasn't for an inside picture like that. But you know what? If we could pull this off, the magazine might go for it. It might be really cool. And he wouldn't do it. And I kept telling him, I got this idea, like, I'll just drape some fabric across your midsection. There's your word again. Across your midsection, and it'll be provocative, but it won't really show anything. And you could be laying down and blah, blah, blah. And he was really reluctant to do it, but I managed to talk him into it. And part of talking him into it was, you got to show it to me. I have to see it before. Now, this was before digital, so we're shooting film. So even though I could show him a Polaroid, he wanted to see what he looked like. So I agreed to it, and I never agree to things like that because I don't think it's fair to my client to show the subject the work before they do, nor is it kind of fair to me. It's a different dynamic. In any case, I agreed to it because I really wanted this to happen. And we did the shot, and it was kind of cool. Mm-hmm. So when I was done, I processed the film, and then he was like, come and show it to me. I desperately wanted to do it because I wanted to give it to the magazine and talk them into it and say, I got you a centerfold of Howard too, like how great this brash, guy on the air who's always, very sexually provocative on the air and stuff. Anyway, I went to the studio and I showed him the pictures and he said yes. And then I went back to my studio, and as I walked in the door, my assistants were like, they had Howard Stern on the radio, and I was like, he's talking about you. And Howard sold me out completely on the air. He just said, yeah, Timothy, I did the shoot with Timothy White. He came in and blah, 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 and I made him show me the pictures before the magazine. But he totally sold me out. So it was kind of fun. It was very much Howard's personality. And I was like, fuck. But it worked. And they ended up printing it. It was kind of cool. And then years later, I got hired to do his book cover for Private Parts. And I think we may have even met through some mutual friend before that, in between there. So, I was comfortable and he was comfortable. And he walked in with these two strippers who proceeded to get undressed. And my assistants were like, what? And
what kind of shoot is this?
And they just walked around the studio unabashedly. And I managed to get them. I got all three of them naked, and then he was just they were covering his private parts, which fit perfectly with the title of the book. And then they ended up using that imagery for the movie poster as well.
When it's funny that for the first shoot, you had to convince him to do something like that because you would think that would be his idea.
Yeah. It was interesting that he was so reticent to do it, but.
One person that you worked with in the past where there's a lot of controversy around him right now is Diddy. Now looking back at the shoot, especially taking into consideration like all the things that are going on in the media pertaining to his criminal trial, what is your perspective on that shoot?
To be honest, I didn't spend a lot of time with him. I just remember he wasn't really engaging and cordial and that kind of thing. So we really didn't get to connect the way I try to do with a lot of my subjects, where we're very friendly and come away from the shoot and it's all hugs and kisses kind of thing. It wasn't that kind of a shoot. It was for Oprah's magazine, for O, I believe. And Oprah was there. Funny, right? I'm thinking now, like, did Oprah go to her freak off? Who knows? But they had a relationship. And so during the shoot, it was more like the two of them were interacting more than I got to really interact with him. It wasn't as one-on-one, And so he did what I wanted him to do, and I got these pictures, but it really wasn't like he and I collaborating, It was more like, here, stand here,
I see.
Diddy was known, very powerful guy, right? And known for his parties, but that doesn't mean that everybody stayed around long enough for the freaky part of the party. You know what I mean? So
And Timothy, I want to talk about projects that you're working on right now. Is there a particular project that you've been working on recently that's excited you creatively?
Well, I've been working on a memoir, and that is a really kind of a big deal for me. And I'm literally like this weekend, I can wrap it up. That's how finished I am with it. Not that the book is completely finished and edited, but that I'm ready to now put it out to my literary agent and to some publishers. And that's a little scary, but it's also something that really excited me and something I really want to do. And I also found in writing it that it was a whole nother way to express myself that was that I felt, once I got into it, I felt really excited about and really comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And it's been a long process. It's been a few years of working on it, but I don't know. I'm kind of at a place with it that I feel I want to put myself out there. And it's not a tell-all, and it's not about even my photo shoots, although there is some description of photo shoots. It's more about what I've learned in life, what I've learned about myself and about my life experience and how rich it's been, and sort of where it started from, being a fucked up kid from New Jersey and how that kind of led itself to somebody who had these opportunities in life and how and why I got there. So that's exciting. I'm working on speaking engagements, doing like a master class. I'm working on another picture book as well. I'm working on assignments. I just finished a couple of great photo shoots, and then I'm really excited about a whole fall campaign for a fashion brand, and I've got another one of those coming up, and I don't know. There's just a lot of I'm still here, still doing it.
And actually writing the memoir, do you feel that you learned something new about yourself going through your whole life?
Oh my God, yeah. I'm a believer in therapy, and but what do you talk about in therapy? You talk about your parents and how they fucked you up, or whatever, and you talk about your relationships now and how fucked up that is, and how that the reason that is that way is because of how you were brought up. And but what the book did was it made me really think about and look at in a different way what happened in between, like childhood and now. And again, not with a tell-all about my career so much as, wow, all of this went on in my life, and how did I do that? And how and why was I able to accomplish some of the things that I accomplished, or even on particular shoots, like or experiences that are basically my shoots, and some of them are longer than just a few hours, they're days or a week or whatever. How did I accomplish that? And I accomplished that because of kind of who I am and how I got here in life, or something like that, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. So, the book has been, it's almost like I don't want it to end. On the other hand, I'm like ready to put it out there. And it's going to be interesting. I love the idea of being on the other side of so let me get this straight. During my life, my career, I've pointed my lens at others, shiny objects, I say, and now I'm turning the lens on myself in a way, and that feels really exciting.
No, and a
little unnerving. But.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. I mean, I feel like anytime you turn the lens to yourself, it is unnerving, but it is exciting. And, you bring up therapy. I remember my whole life growing up, and up until maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, I thought, I don't understand therapy. Like, why do people need it? And then people would say things like, it all goes back to your childhood. And I thought, no, my life was different. It wasn't until recently that I was like, oh man, I have a lot of stuff to unpack here. Yeah. I wonder at what point does the conflict arise? Because some people know immediately, you have to be in therapy right away. It takes others a while, but I wonder what the shift is, or what has that looked like in your experience?
I mean, look, anybody who's a parent knows that there's no rule book. You don't know what you're doing until you do it. Mm-hmm. And everything that you impose on your children was imposed on you, was imposed on your parents, was imposed on their parents, their grandparents. But you know what I mean? It just kind of comes down because no one knows what they're doing. And so it's some way, somehow along the way, people's stuff gets imposed on their children that then, and again, sometimes it's horrible. Sometimes it's really serious trauma mm-hmm. and abuse or whatever that is imposed upon you that then is reflected later on in life. And there's other times where it's very minor stuff, but it's still traumatic in that right. it set who you are, in my case, and then, it's everything's about your mother or your father, depending on, your gender or whatever. It's more like one or the other is affecting you. But, my mother I was the baby in my family, and my mom was very much about her, and there was something lacking. And that as minor as that, she didn't burn me with cigarettes or anything, but something as minor as that was still traumatic in that as a little boy, I needed something that I wasn't getting, I guess, And so that translates into your life as an adult and into your relationships. Mm-hmm. And you don't even realize it until you get into serious relationships. Again, when you're younger and you're like, at least for a guy, you're starting your career, you're trying to be somebody, and you're trying to figure out your life's trajectory in terms of career and work and things. And so you get caught up in it, in yourself, and you don't really look at it until a little bit later, maybe when you get into a relationship and you have those other things set. And now all of a sudden what comes out is, is the triggers and the difficulties that you may find in your interaction and relationships. And then if you have children, then you start to see maybe how you impose that on them, or how they're reacting and why they're reacting or growing up a certain way. And you get to look at yourself. So I guess to get back to your question, I think for some anyway, I think therapy can be a way of talking out your things to somebody who understands where it may come from, and whether that therapist style is to advise or to really interact or just listen. One way or the other, it's a forum with which you can be honest and maybe look at yourself a little bit differently and learn. I mean, in my case, what I want to do is just make myself a better person, and I want to be able to recognize who I am and what I bring to a relationship, and I can best not just manage a relationship, but be the best person I can to that partner.
And you brought up two interesting points. One was that you don't necessarily need to be, burned with cigarettes as a kid or abused to go to therapy. I think everyone could benefit from therapy, for sure. And the second is that it's true, especially as a young man, when you're first starting your career, you are trying to make it and, become something. So I feel like when you're in that frame of mind, it's more about survival and building. So you're not really at a place yet where you can start to deal with the things that have happened to you. But
also in my particular case, I had a lot of affirmation and a lot of reward and things that kept me lost in myself. This rich life experience was just there for me for the taking, and I reveled in it. It was an adrenaline fix. It was this opportunity to just, oh my God, I can do that, and today I can do this, and and I'm on top of a mountain, and I'm flying in private jets with so and so, or whatever it is, kind of kept me in this world that made me feel that I was on my own train. And it's interesting because, I mentioned what I thought my mother was. My mother was very much involved in herself. And yet, look what happened to me, kind of similar in a way. So that makes me want to analyze it. It makes me want to think about it. And so can I be less taking and more giving in relationships? Or is that pattern going to carry through my whole life?
Mm-hmm. How has your definition of success changed since you were that young man just starting your career?
I think that's the case for everybody. It always continues to shift. As you get older, you start to realize different things in life. I will say this, it was never about money. It was always about life experience, sort of the next high, if you will, even though I wasn't doing it just for a high. It definitely was like, wow, look at where this is going. Look at the opportunities that are in front of me. So, I'm definitely, an opportunist in that regard, and sort of an experience junkie. But I'm looking, and I think that's part of what the memoir is doing for me. I'm looking at a different time in my life and what's important for me and what represents success for me now. And I think part of it is certainly the word gratitude. It's certainly an appreciation for all that I've experienced and for where I'm at right now in my life. I think it's also about how healthy I am in mind, body, and spirit, and how much more I want to do and do it in a different way.
And Timothy, one thing that I've been very curious to get your perspective on is nowadays, people are turning to iPhones and influencers as photography. Do you think that aspect, do you think that those things democratize the art form, or do you think it dilutes it?
I think it democratizes it to some degree, but I don't look at it like that. They're all just tools. We are so much about capturing the image. It's really interesting. Think about when photography was invented, not that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, it wasn't this reproduction of imagery and this inundation with imagery as we, it's what we're about now. No, I think it's all cool. I think I just love it all. And in terms of like the phone versus, AI representations and of imagery and creation of imagery, they're just tools, and image making and storytelling is what I'm about. So it's all exciting.
And how do you think that celebrity culture and photography are going to change over the next 10 years, especially taking AI into consideration?
Yeah, I don't know. I certainly don't have the answers for that. I think that AI's creation, or shall I say, the representation of celebrity is inaccurate. It's inaccurate by design because it's culling from the blockchain. It's taking pieces of anything that's out there of this person and then sort of making its own version of that. And it kind of hallucinates and just takes a piece of this and a piece of that and says, well, here, this is what Humphrey Bogart looks like. But that's not really what Humphrey Bogart looks like. It's this machine's version, and the machine is another intelligence for sure. I guess what I'm getting at is the work that I've done. Okay, let's not use Humphrey Bogart. Let's use a celebrity I've worked with.
Okay,
Harrison Ford. So I've worked with Harrison Ford over a long period of time, and during that time, I've captured and created images of him that are of a high level, a high creative level, a high technical level, with a specific point of view of someone who does that for a living at a high level and does it to create a representation of that person that they approve of. And because of the high level of it, it becomes something we all approve of. That's an amazing image of Harrison Ford. That's what he looks like. Mm-hmm. But AI can't make that decision. There isn't the human vision. Instead, what it's doing, it's culling from all these other things and putting something together that they think looks like him, or it thinks looks like him. And it isn't. So I think there's a basis for what I've done and people like me have done that represents that person, that celebrity, that AI can then enhance and utilize once we map out my creation. It gets mapped into AI, and then AI can use it as a tool to use it in many different ways. In other words, take my version of Harrison Ford and then have him move, have him change his suit, change it, whatever, put a watch on his arm, but do whatever AI can do, put it in a different environment and do it well, but not really capture the essence of a human being well, because it's not one point of view. What AI does is taking it from many points of view. It's pulling a picture of Harrison Ford that's in the blockchain and going, well, here's what Harrison Ford looks like. No, that's not. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's what I'm playing with and experiencing and experimenting with right now. And that's really a big part of my interest at the moment.
No, and that's a good point. Like AI does a really great job at inserting things into different scenarios, but you're right, it doesn't capture humanity at all.
No.
You can, it looks totally empty.
Right, so even in its most simplest form, how do we utilize AI? Well, we use it by prompting, right? And the more you prompt it, the more detailed you are, the deeper you go, the clearer the response back is going to be on whatever, whether it be images or whether it be text, whatever you're trying to utilize it for. So let's take that to my point, which is if you use the right image at a high level that's representative of the subject, that the subject thinks is representative of them, and we as the public thinks is representative of them, then that tool is using that as the basis, the extra prompt, basically, if you will. The detailed prompt, here's the detail. It's that picture. then we can use that picture, map it, use that within AI to, that celebrity image or that celebrity face can then live on in perpetuity with the right representation rather than some mutated version that AI is going to create. And then if that mutated version becomes a popular version and used a lot, then it gets mutated again and again and again. And it'll never really be that version that I captured at that time with that interaction, with that technique, with that point of view. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I actually never thought of it that way, but you're absolutely right.
Yeah, so this is the stuff that I'm working on with people right now, especially people who are working on celebrity representation in AI imagery.
And do you have any exciting projects other than the memoir that are coming up soon?
You know, I've got photo shoots that I've done that are about to come out to the public. Again, another picture book. Yeah, I mean, I've got my hands in a lot of different things, exhibitions around the world. All that is exciting for me, and it's like every day there's just so many different projects to work on and put the pieces together. You know, whether it be exhibitions, whether it be a presentation, whether it be a photo shoot, my archive. You know, unearthing what's around us here is a job that is a never-ending job.
Thank you so much, Timothy. I really appreciate your time.
Pleasure. Thank you. Great to see you again.